revenge is inevitable. And so the specter of Marx, which comes in three different specters, three different Marxism, and leads to a call on Derrida's part, a very daring call, for a new international, but the dead who have died demand from us nothing other than some kind of recommitment to a new international. Now, how does this get back to your paper? I was very taken aback and very moved when I walked in to see Derrida on the wall in the coffee room, and felt absolutely obligated to take that moment to smile at him. Now, because had I not smiled at him, I would have not heard his call. There may be so much packed into that sentence that I still don't understand. You may be ashamed of it, but I thought you did an extraordinary job, and C did an extraordinary job, that we must try to respond, to hear the address. And what you call literalization, he says, smile at me wherever I am until the end. And so in a sense, that would be my response to your question. The haunting of the dead is indeed scary because they demand so much of us, and that demand can never adequately be recoded, perhaps any more than any demand ethically put on us by a homeless person in London. You know, what is that? What does that demand actually mean? You know, if they ask for $1, you give them $1, but is that really the demand? So in that sense, I think one of the powerful aspects of Derrida's notion of the performing, of the haunting, of the performativity of the dead is that it is indeed a scary demand which is inseparable from our infinite responsibility to do justice, knowing that that may well be not impossible, but such a complex demand that it can never be met or realized.
Can I? Sorry. I don't know. There's another question.
Carry this on.
I am in a kind of southern position. What you just thought made me think of what you just said. Made me think of something because of your reference to Habermas. Interestingly, you may be well aware of this. At some point in the 1980s, Habermas, in his work, takes up a notion from a German theologian, which in German is anamnestische Solidarität, anamnestic solidarity. So Habermas too is, in a sense, you know, aware of the necessity of listening to the dead, or of the dead coming back, because obviously the question for him must be, if indeed one day we will be able to live in the kind of community of free and rationally arguing agents that he has in mind, and performing that way, how many sacrifices will we have had to pay throughout history to get there? How many people will have had to, you know, how many deaths will, as it were, violent deaths, terrible deaths, will have had to be justified in order to get there, yes? And what do we do then with all those who are dead and who didn't get there, you know? What do we do with those? So it's as if suddenly we're listening to those voices, the ones who died, and died maybe, you know, without even knowing exactly why they were dying, and we who have finally arrived and are part of this community, we in a sense live off those deaths as well, of those sometimes sacrifices perhaps. So he thinks, so we need to relate to them. If we don't, if we are oblivious of those who are dead and who allowed us to get where we are now because of what they did or didn't quite achieve or whatever it was, then it is almost as if our community cannot be the ideal community it's meant to be. And this is where this concept of anamnestic solidarity, of a solidarity through anamnesis of the dead comes in, which, as you can, you know, it's immediately obvious why this is a notion that he took from a theologian. But the question, of course, and this is why I'm bringing up all of this, and I suppose it's also a question for Derrida, is, but to whom do I listen when I listen to the dead, and to whom do I not listen? Because what about the perpetrators? What about the Hitlers and the others, as it were, who are also dead, and who, as it were, are the ones who are responsible for the other deaths? Will they be excluded from anamnestic solidarity? Well, they must. Otherwise, anamnestic solidarity is seen to be anamnestic solidarity, precisely. But if they are excluded, if we don't listen to them, as it were, if they are forever excluded, in a way, because we will not continue listening to them, then what happens to that ideal community in the end? It will be an ideal community that will be built upon an exclusion, necessarily, and hence exposed once again to a haunting. You know, those dead who have been excluded by necessity, with whom we can't feel any solidarity, we must not, if we are not to betray the other dead, you see? So it's a terrible situation, the question of to whom do I listen and to whom not when I listen to the dead.
Can I just,
To which Derrida do I listen, to which Derrida do I not listen?
can I just add one text to this discussion, which is Derrida's 2 essays on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, where he explicitly addresses this question, both the dead and the living perpetrator, and therefore says that if there is no way for us to have forgiveness, which must be some form of absolute forgiveness for the perpetrators, then reconciliation will once again be explicitly based on exclusion. And so the most difficult task facing a new South Africa is precisely how does one take the perpetrators into the community. It's not just a matter of not killing them, but having to have some relationship to them, which Derrida said would have to be one of unconditional forgiveness, precisely because of that. In the seminar in which he spoke about that, people said, not just the perpetrators in South Africa, the easy perpetrators, right? The soldiers who were kids, who were had to go to the army if you were Afrikaners and were killed on the border of Angola. Those perpetrators, we can somehow or another pretty easily say that they can be included in our community of the dead, to whom we address our great sorrow that they had to fall in a war in which they barely understood and were forced to take up a position. But what about the perpetrators who survived and who were given, many of them, amnesty, some not? And what about, of course, the ultimate perpetrator we all seem to come back to, which is Hitler? What do we leave him in his hell? And Derrida was silent for a long time before answering that. This gets back to your question about revenge. It's nothing more vengeful, right, than to say, you soldier, Afrikaner, who died on the Angolan border, I address you, in whatever form that you demanded me. But you, Hitler, you are completely beyond the pale of humanity. Therefore, I condemn you forever, and I will not accept your address. He didn't have an easy answer, perhaps because there, as you put it, which Derrida ought to be listened to. There, if we listen to unconditional forgiveness, that includes Hitler. That's what unconditional means. But and what does it mean for us if we don't? And I think that may be the most challenging, almost unanswerable question, yet one that you're constantly called to answer in a post-colonial situation. I just wanted to say one thing about the falling out, which is part of what worried Derrida very deeply, was that the subtracting in philosophy of transcendence did 2 things. It literally subtracted the dead from philosophical discussion, which, as we've seen, says Derrida. And secondly, the heteros, the other, the 11